I wanted to start out by asking just how religious was your upbringing? Did you grow up going to church? Did you grow up in a religious context?
Right. So my dad was like a college professor, as you know, so he was always very somewhat hands off about it. I did go to church. So I went to maybe a Episcopalian church until I was like 8. And then we moved from St. Louis, Missouri to Franklin, Tennessee, which obviously then you're kind of in the Bible Belt there. And I think my dad tried to find like the chillest, like Christian church he could find that wouldn't be all like fire and brimstone because he wasn't into that. So from the time I was like 8 until I was maybe like 12 or 13, we were going to church pretty regularly. And it honestly was more of just like a community thing. Like, I think my dad was more interested in it just because it seemed like a healthy thing for us to do. Whereas my mom, I think, actually kind of wanted us to go to church.
Mm. So your mom was more kind of into it for the religious side of it, and your dad was into it for the community side?
Yeah, because I found out later, like maybe just 5 years ago or something, I guess my dad kind of views himself as an atheist or agnostic at the least. So, but my mom is like, she would say she's religious, but she doesn't go to church or anything. So even she was pretty hands off with it. I think it was more of just like the expectation of us to go. But the thing was, like, I had really like not a bad experience with it because I think later I would just see people really like reacting to how they grew up with Christianity. And for me, it was so neutral to positive that I never really had negative feelings towards it.
Did you not have negative feelings because, you know, since your parents were like hands off, and maybe did you have like friends at church and stuff? Or maybe the church you went to wasn't, it was kind of not, you know, maybe it wasn't as extreme as some of the other people who like railed against Christianity and stuff?
Yeah, it wasn't extreme at all. And I didn't have like a lot of friends there. Like, it was never something that like my social life was centered around the church, but like I liked going to church other than the part where I had to sit there and like listen to people talk. But we did like choir and like stuff like that. And everything surrounding the actual like church part of church was really fun for me.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was just so tuned out to like the sermons and stuff as well. But I did have some friends, and yeah, I guess I had a neutral to positive experience with church growing up. You know, a lot of Sundays I would have rather just chilled at the house or slept in or whatever. And I was we always went to church every Sunday. So it was a little, you know, demanding. And so your personal, when you were a kid and a teenager, did you feel like you had any sort of personal spirituality?
No, absolutely not. Because I remember as soon as I remember being in like 5th grade maybe and asking my mom, I was like, because I got really worried for a long time because I was like, what if God is not real? And I didn't talk to anyone about it because I thought even talking about it, it's kind of like if you've ever read Carl Jung's like autobiography, and he has all these weird thoughts about God, and it's like really immature stuff, like when he was a kid, just thinking the worst thing he could think of, and he couldn't come to terms with even like thinking it. That was how I felt just about even thinking about the possibility that God was not real. I felt like there was something wrong with me. So I remember I asked my mom, like, and it was like something I really had to build up to. And I was like, what if God's not real? And she was like, oh, like, don't think about that. And that was That was the extent of our conversation.
That's
So
pretty cool that you
as
brought it
soon
up
as
to her though.
yeah, because I just knew she wouldn't. It was never anything like I felt like my parents would judge me for not going along with it, so I didn't feel worried about telling her. But then I remember, I don't remember. So it was a Methodist church. I don't remember if you have confirmation there, but there was something we were doing that was like confirmation. And that was when I really, I think, stopped going soon after that, because I think I just said, like, yeah, I believe in God and stuff, but it felt very disingenuous because I never felt anything really spiritual in like a
Mhm.
Christian church. Like I really didn't feel anything like that for a long time.
Mhm. I know you got into music pretty early on, and I know you've like loved music probably your whole life, and you played a lot of music. I'm just curious if back then or throughout the years, if like your love for music and your playing of music has been, something that you would consider spiritual at all.
Yeah, I mean, I would say more recently, it's weird because I would say from the times I was like 12 to like 19 or 20, I really didn't think of anything in spiritual terms. It just
Yeah.
didn't cross my mind. I wasn't ever an atheist. I never considered myself an atheist, but I just didn't think about it for a long time. So with music, even in high school, I don't think I would consider that spiritual. But in my late teens and early 20s, I would just sit and listen to music by myself for like hours sometimes. And that got to be, and looking back, I take it back because I even remember, um, I think it's more of maybe the memory that feels spiritual rather than maybe how I felt at the time. But I was thinking about this time when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and my dad was driving me and my brother to a cave that had a swimming hole. And he was playing like Skinny Puppy in the car, which is this really intense, like industrial, like really dark, like gothic music. And I remember just having all these images, like I was literally like having visions, like listening to the music. And so I think in retrospect, stuff that I wouldn't have labeled spiritual at the time that had to do with music, looking back, or in marching band, they would do this thing where they gathered everyone around and you would huddle up and they would put on adagio for sprints for strings. If you've ever heard that, it's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
emotional. And it was basically like praying, but that's not what we said we were doing. It was like, this is our ritual before we like do the, like go onto the field and march. But it was like definitely a ritual or like a prayer, like in
Oh yeah.
retrospect.
Yeah. So the times that like listen to music by yourself and it maybe seems contemplative or meditative or entrancing or something like that. And then I'm sure maybe even when you're just playing music, either with your band or by yourself, I would imagine that sometimes it feels like you're kind of, you know, either in the flow state or something's happening that is obviously beyond the ordinary. So I just feel like for me, there's certain music that I listen to definitely makes me feel like I'm having a spiritual experience. So that's why I was curious about your take on that.
Yeah. And I think now more so because I do consider myself, um I'm more in touch with the spiritual side of things, I guess. But
Right.
playing in front of people or like just like getting into that flow state, like you said, and then or like realizing you've been playing for like 20 minutes and then
Yeah.
it feels like it's been like a minute. I mean, it literally has stuff like that where like time is like bending and like I don't
Yeah.
know it. I definitely have more of an appreciation for it now as like a spiritual practice, whereas before I viewed it as more of a technical practice.
Yes. Okay. Cool, man. Well, before we move on to anything else, I want to just ask if there are any like unusual or mystical or synchronistic experiences really throughout your whole life that you can think of that you might want to share?
Yeah. This is just the first thing I'm thinking of because I was playing this card game with some people the other day that was like get to know each other kind of game, and it was like talking about your earliest kind of memories. But I remember, well, a couple of things at my grandma's house. You've been there.
Yeah.
So maybe you could see, or I don't know if you remember that. It was like the
Super
big
old.
white house.
Yeah, I remember that,
Yeah.
of course.
So it has this kind of like crazy energy to it. And the first thing I can really ever remember, or it just seems like my oldest memory, is like being at that house, and then it was like fall, and my dad had like raked. There was like there were so many leaves, and he made like a maze through like the leaves. So I was like walking through the maze and felt like I was like doing something, like I was on like a journey or something.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand what it was. And it felt like that was kind of mystical because now I feel like I'm doing the same thing, like literally doing the same thing, but I'm just like an adult and it's more complicated, but it still feels in a way just as simple as that.
I love that.
And then I remember going back to the music thing, being in that same spot when I was like super angsty and like probably between 17 and 16 and 19 years old, and listening to All Apologies by Nirvana on headphones. The line where it's like, in the sun, we are as one. And I was like looking at the sun, and I just remember that for some reason. And then I've had like weird out of body kind of experiences that I couldn't get into too much, but definitely that there was a big shift when I was probably 19 or 20 with these out of body experiences where I was pretty convinced after that. I felt so, I didn't think about religion or spirituality, but after these experiences, I was like, I have this intuition that there's some kind of like metaphysical reality that I had never really crossed my mind or I hadn't thought much about before. And and you can kind of see it all the time around you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we don't have to get into too many details on that, but I would imagine that if you had out of body experiences, it just kind of like highlights that the reality of consciousness is different than what we assume, I guess, if it can kind of transcend your body or something.
Yeah, I mean, if you literally see your body from outside your body, I mean, that just there's not much explanation needed why that's would cause a paradigm shift. But I had to I still just remain really agnostic about it all, because the kind of sense that I get, I'm like studying religion now and stuff, and it just seems really apparent to me that the whole point of being human is, part of it is not knowing for sure what's going on. So, you know, anything could just be a product of my mind, but
Yes.
it doesn't feel that way.
Right. You know, I think a healthy agnosticism is a good approach. And Robert Anton Wilson, you know, he was all about like that sort of thing, and he always considered himself like an agnostic mystic or a mystical agnostic or something like that. And what I love about Robert Anton Wilson, though, is his agnosticism was like very affirmative. Like he would totally be open to experimenting with all sorts of possibilities without ever fully saying that this is capital T truth. You know, he was open to anything being possible, really. And that's the type of agnosticism he practiced. And I do like that. And he inspired, when I read his book called Cosmic Trigger a couple of years ago, he made me want to just practice like an experimental spirituality, where I was just experimenting with different possibilities and looking at reality through different lenses just to see what might happen and what might arise in that reality tunnel, I guess. But when it comes to what you were saying, like as far as out of body stuff or just non-ordinary states of consciousness or non-ordinary experiences, like, I mean, it's very obvious that those things happen to a lot of people. But I think that the danger is when we start making like strict conclusions about what that is and what that means. I have no clue what it means or what it is, but I know it exists. And I think that like there's a guy named Forrest Church who I heard he's passed away now, but I watched a YouTube video with him the other day, and he said like for him the religious attitude was basically grounded in awe and humility, this sense of like, how does anything exist, mixed with I have no idea what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, I think that and when he said that, I was like, that's kind of in some ways the core of my spirituality too, is that ever since I was a kid, I've been baffled at my own existence and baffled that anything exists. And then in my adult years, once my spirituality had already been stoked, but had over time become more and more open and experimental, that humility and that lack of knowing is a huge part of it, which makes me excited. And I think mystery is at the heart of it. And I'm totally down with that. Like, I love embracing the mystery, and I chase the mystery or I chase the mystery, but I also surrender to the mystery,
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes like to the whole famous like Alan Watts thing that he says about, if you knew everything, or I can't remember the anecdote exactly, but he's like, if you knew everything, you would get very bored. So what would you do? You would say like, I'm going to have this like dream or something. And so, the mystery does seem like it's at the heart of it all, or is like the point, or like there's no real answer to most things in your life, and that's part of what gives it meaning, I guess, is like having to come to terms with the question.
The questions are more enlivening than the answers usually. Well, we've been touching on it here a little bit, but one way I've been thinking about these episodes, I think I mentioned this to you, but one way I've been thinking about these conversations and these episodes, and been thinking about my own spirituality and thinking about the book that I'm writing that kind of deals with some of these things, is experience, philosophy, and practice, and so I've asked you about some experiences and stuff, and we've started touching on kind of philosophy, but do you have anything else to say about what your at this point your personal spiritual philosophy is?
I'm gonna be honest, because I'm not it's not been especially like fruitful lately. I'm kind of in I think just with COVID and everything. At the beginning, I was trying to meditate and think about these kind of things more, but I feel like I'm struggling to just keep my head above water right now, and I know I need to invest more time thinking about my spiritual philosophies and practices, because I'll definitely feel a lot better and be able to be a better human, but I just haven't been able to invest a lot in it recently. I mean, as far as my the main influences of philosophy, I just think like the Buddhists like nailed it in a lot of ways. So usually when I have a problem, I'm just like, well, if I approach this from like generally Buddhist perspective, or how we in America view Buddhism, like it would probably solve. That's the thing, like that is kind of the answer, I think. Like, I'm saying there's like all these questions you can't answer, but I think Buddhism does a really good job of saying like, well, here's an answer that will at least like alleviate your suffering and other people's suffering. So I think a lot of it comes from that. Usually when I have a deep spiritual problem, I like just think about the Buddha, or like how a good Buddhist would like approach it,
I
whatever a
like
good
that.
Buddhist. Yeah.
Right, right. No, I like that, you know, because when Buddha supposedly got, asked really big questions that he couldn't answer, like we were saying earlier, um, he wouldn't answer them. He was
Yeah.
like, "There's no use in me answering that." So he would either say that or he would just be quiet. And so he wasn't interested in that sort of. I mean, I'm sure that I'm sure maybe he had his own notions about those big questions, but it wasn't practical for him to make that a central part of his teachings. And I think that's what you're hitting on, is that, you know, practicality, finding ways to have a practical way of looking at spirituality is it's probably the most effective and healthy way to go about it. So if we can find techniques and tools and lenses to look at our lives through that can relieve unnecessary suffering and increase well-being, like that's what matters. And the
Yeah,
Buddhists were
yeah.
really good at that. The Buddhism, I would say, is out of the big religions, definitely the most practical.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna go on the record with that because I feel like sort of biased in that way, but I definitely have that I definitely have that intuition. And but all that reminded me, like, the anecdote with like the Zen master and like the poisoned arrow or whatever.
I've heard of it, but remind me.
Have you? Well, it's just like what you were saying about the practicality and not asking questions that don't necessarily have answers, because it was like this Buddhist monk got shot with a poison arrow or something. I don't know how it happened. And then the Zen master like came over and was like, let me pull that out. And then the monk was like, wait, like, what kind of poison is this? Like, how long is this poison going to take effect? And he was like, what's going to happen if you pull the arrow out? Like, and then the master was just like, it doesn't really matter like what the
Yeah.
answers to those questions are. You just have to know if I pull the arrow out, it's going to relieve your suffering. So like,
Right.
just kind of set those questions up. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. And it's like he was wasting time by asking the questions. It's like, just pull the arrow out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's good stuff. Yeah, I mean, some of those Zen stories and Zen koans and stuff are just brilliant. Okay, so I wanted to shift a little bit into what you've been doing recently with your school, and you're going to school for. Well, I'll let you explain it, because I know my understanding was that it revolved around comparative religion, but I think that it's a little different than that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm pretty new to all this. So like, I mean, I've been in the program for almost a year at this point, and then was taking classes for a year before that. But so I'm still kind of parsing it out. But I mean, I think there are definitely people in my department who have done comparative religion or whatever. And I think but they were trying to do it in a way that was maybe more responsible, because I know there's a lot of criticism of past comparative efforts, because they tend to focus on emphasizing the similarities of certain traditions rather than noting the particularities. I mean, yeah. I think it's kind of maybe swinging too far to the other side is my initial perspective from just getting into this, because you can't just focus on the particularities either. I mean, there are like absolutes, like or at least things that are more similar. So I mean, I think the pendulum should swing back a bit, and like we can recognize the particularities and what makes certain religious traditions unique, while still kind of recognizing that some of the things they do are kind of similar. So I mean, but then a lot of other people are taking a more kind of like less comparative approach, and more it's shifted to a lot of like historical approaches, which I am interested in. I don't know exactly what I'm gonna do yet, but the program's very cool though. Actually, the program is it's at Georgia State University, so it's a master's program where you can do a bachelor's and master's, and it's really focused on it's really an applied program, so it's more about applying these skills. So I may be actually kind of an outlier in that. I wouldn't say an outlier, but I want to pursue an academic career, whereas a lot of people are working in healthcare or ethics, or you know, there's a whole partnership with this healthcare organization, so a lot of people are actually doing that, which I think is great. You know, because it's not traditionally a degree that people will be like, this is going to be immediately useful unless you're going to pursue an academic.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Well, number one, what popped up for me when you were talking about that is, yeah, as far as the similarities and differences between religions, that's something I think about as well. And, you know, there was a while where I was like reading and consuming content about, in a lot of ways, about the differences between the religions. And I think that, like, obviously there's going to be particular differences based on culture and, you know, even geography and just the history of different cultures. Of course, they're going to express their religious, you know, beliefs and structures differently. And of course we should pay attention to that. And certain belief systems have certain consequences, you know what I mean? Like, we can't ignore that, like, certain beliefs and certain ideologies have different consequences. So we can't act like every belief system is going to have the same consequence, because that's not true. But I do tend to believe, as much as all of that's important, like, for me personally, I think I'm just more interested in the wisdom of each of those traditions, and what I see is like maybe the heart of them. And even the heart of each tradition, yeah, has differences and different expressions. But and maybe I'm naive about this, or maybe I'm just trying to fit it into my own bias or something, but it seems to me that the core of each religious tradition is kind of mysticism, in the sense that it's about the direct experience with the divine, whatever that might mean for any given individual, but that unmediated, unfiltered, direct experience with God or reality or whatever people call it. And that's why I heard somebody say that, like, the mystics of each tradition have more in common than the non-mystics of one single religion, if that makes sense. Like, you know what I mean? The people in one religion that aren't really into the mystical side of it, they have less in common with the mystics within that their own tradition. But the mystics of each tradition seem to have a lot in common, sometimes even mind-bending things in common, like it's expressed almost very similarly. So I think that's what I'm personally interested in.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I might push back a little bit, but I'm not really meaning to, because I'm honestly just kind of struggling with this myself, because that was what got me into all of this, was mysticism. Yeah. So there's definitely, well, I'm not even gonna say my opinion because I don't know what it is yet, but there's definitely a big pushback in the scholarship that rejects this notion that there's this common mystical core that's a cross-cultural type of mysticism. Okay, I will interject with my own opinion a little bit. I have a friend in a reading group, and we're talking about this, and we're basically just saying the truth is somewhere in the middle. So, you know, the whole perennial philosophy, like there's this core to all these religious traditions that they're kind of teaching the same thing. That resonates with me or whatever, but I don't really buy it on a scholarly level. But then the reaction to that kind of thing in the study of mysticism was that, well, every mystic's experience is determined by cultural context, and there's no such thing as unmediated experience. And so the mystics of each tradition are experiencing something that is conditioned by their tradition. My friend and I that have been talking about this are just saying it's somewhere in the middle. Like they're from the reports, and we have to be somewhat skeptical because we're reading all of these in English rather than the original languages. But from the reports, I mean, you can see some similarities. And I think that there is at least part of the experience, or at least some subset of mystics within each tradition that did experience something that probably was very similar. So I'm kind of trying to responsibly bring that idea back into the scholarship, but it's hard because people have been working against that for a while. But I think the key to it now is all the research with psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. That's, I think, going to be part of the key to it, for sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Dude, amen. This is so interesting. I appreciate, I mean, I want you to obviously be, you know, completely honest with me about this stuff, even if we might disagree. But yeah, you know, I think it's always dangerous to see things, you know, to reduce things down to either it's definitely this or either it's definitely this. I mean, I think it's definitely somewhere in the middle. And I like what you're saying. I mean, a person's, it's definite. It's sorry, I just said definitely like 12 times. It is likely, well, I struggle with the question of whether we can have an unmediated experience. You know, I know that it's easier to argue that we can't, of course, for various reasons. And so I've leaned that way ultimately for a while. But the more I get into Vedanta and certain things in Hinduism and even, you know, even the concept of emptiness in Buddhism, where I think it's possible that we can have an experience or put ourselves in a certain mind state that has emptied out our conditioning, and that is at least more unmediated, if not fully unmediated. But that's a whole thing that we could really never answer at this point.
No, yeah.
But I just, one last note on that whole conditioning thing. I will say that whether a person's conditioning always 100% affects any experience that they have, which of course at least 99% of their experience is going to be conditioned in some sort. I just think that, you know, I'm kind of like a spiritual optimist in the sense that I think it is possible for there to be some mystical experience that does transcend conditioning, I guess. But I will say that even if somebody can have a mystical experience that transcends conditioning, their expression and their way of making sense of that mystical experience is, of course, going to be conditioned by the framework that they exist in. So the way that their reference points or their expression of it is going to be not the same as somebody from another culture, you know, because of language and all that stuff.
I'm 100% there with you. And I think I'm a spiritual optimist too. I had never thought of that phrase, but well, what I was going to say is it's funny that you talked about like some portion that's unmediated, because Stephen Katz, the guy who kind of was the big buzzkill for mysticism scholarship, or like brought in all the hard questions. I mean, I think he did a good job because it was things that people should be thinking about. But someone brought that up, what you brought up basically, and he was like, well, I don't deal with percentages of mediation. I'm just saying that there is some mediation. But an anecdote, I wish I could remember who said this, but there's an essay on this kind of topic, and someone used this example of like, say like someone hadn't had like a cup of coffee before, or hadn't tasted coffee. Someone could explain like that it's bitter, or like it's hot, or like maybe there's sugar in it and that's going to counteract the bitterness and give you all these qualities. But you're not going to have the experience of drinking the coffee until you drink it. Like there's something that you gain out of drinking the coffee. So in the same way, I kind of turned that anecdote around, and I was like, if someone told you that coffee was like extremely sweet and cold, and you drank the cup of coffee, just because you were conditioned to think that doesn't mean that you're going to all of a sudden say, oh, this is cold. Like the experience is going to tell you that it's scalding hot. So I don't know. It's complicated.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think that illustrates that, the direct experience is primary, and our way of explaining it, or the way of framing it, is secondary. It's like the map is not the territory, And for a long time, I don't know. I've thought about that in a lot of ways, because ultimately I think that everything that exists is reality. So the map is just as much of reality as the territory, but nevertheless, the two are not the same. I mean, but I've just grown to. I think maps are fun to play around with, as long as you have like a lightness about it, and you're not dogmatic about it, because maps can help us explore the territory. But I want to shift into the whole psychedelic research thing, if you're all right with that, maybe just for a little bit, because you said that maybe this new frontier and of course it started decades ago, but then got shut down and then opened back up and stuff. So throughout the last 50 or 60 years, there's been a lot of psychedelic research and everything. But I wonder, in what way do you think that you said that might be part of the key to the problem in some way? So how do you see the psychedelic research being a really useful tool for us to understand this stuff better?
I wish I could go grab this book right now, because I couldn't fall asleep. I've been waking up at like 5 a.m. And not being able to go back to sleep for a while. So I just like read for an hour, and I downloaded this book called High Culture. I think the subtitle is like Drugs, Mysticism, and Transcendence in the Modern Age, or something like that. But he said it in such a good way, which is something that I already said in my paper, but it's just that the research brings together the secular and the mystical and the religious, or like we could say a lot of different things, like the spiritual. It brings them all into this arena where these contradictions kind of like collapse. Like these studies are like scientific studies, so it's like that's something we traditionally view as like a secular kind of like enterprise. Right. But you can't secularize these studies because of the experiences that people are having. And you see that in the language. I've been reading these psychological, these articles from these psychological studies, and they're like quoting Alan Watts and stuff. So like it really, to me, this is just what shows the breakdown. There was like a secularization thesis that sociologists were saying society is going to become more and more secular because Europe and other places where that's kind of what has happened. But it depends on how you define secular, and it's not happening. Like, because, so I think literally these studies is showing like the breakdown of this idea that we can separate like religion from anything, or spirituality, or whatever you want to call it. Like, you can't really.
I like that. Yeah, man. I have the intuition, and just from, obviously I follow my obsession. So, it's like the stuff that I see online, for example, is getting advertised to me based on the things I already am into. So I have a small sliver of what might be going on for other people. But it seems to me that that an interest in the spiritual, so to speak, is actually getting amplified right now. And I love to imagine, and I think you're right, and I think psychedelic research is a nice bridge for that, and is something that's revealing, as you said, like kind of almost the impossibility of separating the two, but I've always had the hope that science and spirituality could more and more stop seeing themselves as, antagonistic toward each other, because I think that spirituality, spiritual people and spiritual endeavors and stuff can learn a lot from a scientific approach to a certain degree, and then scientists can apply scientific methods to studying spiritual experience. I know it's tough because a lot of the mystical stuff is like ineffable or whatever, so it gets really hard to navigate that, but nevertheless, like, the two can totally coexist and collaborate in ways that are really exciting. And when science became a really big deal, a lot of them were interested in spiritual stuff. A lot of the great scientists were very spiritual, and they often, even, so Carl Jung, for example, obviously Carl Jung was super into mystical stuff and esoteric things, and he was a wild man. He had all sorts of crazy mystical experiences, and he captures a lot of that in his Red Book, for example, as you probably know. And he didn't want to release that to the public because he had this scientific reputation. He didn't want to compromise that by, going into the weeds or whatever. And so there's always been, it's like scientists have felt like they can't really dabble into that too much because it's going to compromise their reputation. But hopefully that's going to not be such a big deal, these days, moving into the future.
The funny thing is, it goes both ways, though, because I took a spiritual but not religious class last semester, and so we most often think of like scientists like crusading against religion or something. There's this idea that science as an institution is literally in like at war with like religious institutions, right, or something. I think because of just how the reaction of fundamentalists to certain like scientific revelations. But then you'll also see, as the concept of like spirituality or spiritual seeker evolved over the course of the like late 19th and 20th centuries, and eventually kind of this new age kind of thing. Well, they early on started incorporating scientific ideas in an effort to legitimatize spirituality. And it's funny because I think now you see something that to me is equally as silly as a scientist trying to disprove the existence of God, which is new age kind of movements or other spiritual movements trying to use science to prove the existence of God, which in my mind, it's not going to do either of those things, right? It's a tool. But for me, like, there was especially a period 2 or 3 years ago where I realized I didn't understand how the universe worked at all. And I'm not saying that I do now, like physically, but I just got into reading it for a while or watching YouTube videos. And when I did, it made me feel this very deep spiritual thing. Like if I try to understand like quantum physics or something, I'm not saying that quantum physics proves anything about a spiritual realm, but it sort of resonates with me in this way that makes me, I can make analogies to certain spiritual beliefs that I have. And I think that can be dangerous because there's this book, The Tao of Physics. I've been wanting to read it just for fun, but I think it kind of makes some really erroneous claims, but it kind of shows that there's this whole religious literature that is focused on science as a means of religious expression, right?
Yeah. No, you made some really great points on that. I totally am on board with all that. I read The Tao of Physics one time several years ago. I remember.
Should I read it?
I liked it. I know that a lot of people hate on it. I want to reread it to try to see what it's not doing right. I remember reading that, and I read a book called Physics as Metaphor around that same time that was trying to do similar things. And but I will say that whenever I do read about certain science and especially quantum physics, my brain automatically translates it as metaphor for like spiritual experience. And I know that can be dangerous, and I don't want to ever, make connections that aren't there. But at the same time, I think
they might be there.
They might be there, and it's fun to kind of see what you can, um, look at one field and then gain wisdom from that field that you can then apply to another sphere. I think that can be pretty exciting.
I think that's part of it, is like, even within academia, I'm like, uh well, this is something I would say about, I feel like, your spiritual philosophy that I would just pick up on, but it's like very like playful.
Yeah.
I think like maintaining an element of playfulness is like really important.
Yeah. I know. And that's just something that is infused in my life in general. And that's one of the reasons why I like Zen so much, because Zen is one of the only spiritual traditions that I can think of that is pretty explicitly playful. I know it's got a serious side too, and a lot of people actually see Zen as extremely dry and serious, and it's got that element too. But I mean, you read Zen koans and like they're definitely playful and weird and paradoxical and ironic and all that stuff. And so I think that, like preserving playfulness can just it's like you're never holding something too tightly, which I think is important when it comes to spiritual stuff. And I think humor itself
and I think
is spiritual.
But I think the Zen thing, that is something where it's pretty apparent. Like, I mean, even though I guess there are serious aspects, like it is always kind of like, well, don't take this too seriously.
Right.
And I like that.
Yeah, I think that's why Zen is so playful, for that exact reason, because they see the dangers of making really conclusive statements about reality. And if we're not basing our sense of reality in this moment right here, right now, for Zen, then we're like kind of missing the point. And so by being playful, they're like constantly just pointing us back to this moment. It's like most of the Zen koans it's like a student asking some philosophical question, and the teacher basically being like, saying something, or even sometimes not even saying anything, but doing some sort of gesture that is causing the student to like be right here, right now. You know what I mean? So it's a cool tradition for sure.
Yeah, I almost like even relate that in a weird way, which seems like so antithetical, but like to Nietzsche or something, because he was against like all these true world philosophies that were saying like, oh, like this is not the true world. Like in his conception of Christianity, it was like, well, there's like a better world, so like he thought Christianity was like extremely nihilistic because it rejected this world in the favor of a payoff in some later world. Zen seems like, it's the exact opposite of that. It's like, no, like this is real and it's not real at the same time, but like treat it like it's real, but treat it like it's not real.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, Nietzsche had a lot of wisdom, man. Like I appreciate a lot of his teachings. I wanted to There's something that I meant to, I guess this is a good thing to bring up right now, because we were just talking about Zen. I've been trying to start off the episodes asking this Zen question and just seeing how the person responds. So I just want to do that really quick, if that's cool.
Yeah.
This is a Zen question from an old Zen koan, and it says, all things return to the one. Where does the one return to?
I guess the nun.
The nun.
That's the first thing I thought of, partially because it rhymes, but I guess it's like, that is the Buddhist idea of the nothingness.
I like that.
I don't know though. I know I would probably have to meditate on that for days or something.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
years.
think about it. It's one. I don't know. I've been filling up a lot of notebooks in the last couple of years, and each notebook kind of has its own function and purpose or whatever, and then I always go back to the previous one. When I start a new one, I go back to the previous one and just write down the things that I want to make sure not to forget, so there's been like 7 notebooks that I've I've written that exact question, and just because I like always want to keep that question in my mind. Um, another thing that I wanted to ask you, I know that you said that you know, you've been you haven't necessarily felt like you've had time and energy to to reflect on your spiritual philosophy as much, or maybe even engage in like spiritual practices and stuff. But I did want to ask you if you did have anything these days that you would consider a spiritual practice, or even just practices in general or routines in general that kind of keep you aligned with the life that you want to live, you know?
Yeah. I'm not doing a good job of that right now. But
Mm,
but when I was, well, no, okay. I've been like cooking a lot,
nice.
and that's something that really like centers me and makes me feel um I mean, ideally I wouldn't be using food that was like unethically sourced, but it does make me feel just in tune with my body, and kind of like not just thinking through things so quickly and using that rational side of my brain. It's like very intuitive. Like that's honestly probably the main thing right now that I'm
Love it.
doing, because I'm not doing a lot of other things that I should do. If I were
Mhm.
doing other things, mainly I just want to get back in the habit of meditating.
What kind of
But
meditation has worked for you in the past the most, would you say?
um I have only done like just Zen. I guess I went to a center, so I guess it was like Soto Zen like style meditation. So just sitting and looking at the wall, and not trying. I mean, I guess before I did that, I just thought the goal was like to get all of the thoughts out of your head, but obviously that's not the idea. It's just like let the thoughts pass by like they're clouds or something, don't attach to anything.
Right.
So that's all I was doing. I wasn't doing it a lot. And I started doing yoga for a bit, which obviously we have this kind of like tradition of Western Americanized yoga that's really, I don't know how much it's really related to what yoga is, but it nevertheless like make me feel connected to my body and just be able to like have moments where I can just get into the moment and not be going crazy.
Yeah. I feel you. Yeah, you're right. I mean, yoga, as we think of it in America, seems like it's just kind of a small sliver of, or even maybe just one type of yoga that has existed in the past. In India, there's all sorts of types of yoga that are more related to, you know, meditation as we think of it, or contemplation and stuff.
But it
But
doesn't
yeah, I
mean,
mean,
I
even
think,
when I just do fit, sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, like, I also just think there's this thing where it's like people want to say, like, well, that's not authentic. So it's like not, well, first of all, it's like, what does authentic mean? But that's not authentic. So it's not spirit. It can't be a spiritual fulfilling practice. But it's like, no, I mean, anything can be a fulfilling spiritual practice. So it's like,
Hell
it's
yeah,
just
dude.
as valid in my
When I
mind.
do yoga, which is just yoga in the way that we think of it, it's been extremely helpful and healing and good for my body and good for my mind for the most part. It's hard to keep a disciplined practice for me doing that, but there were a couple months where I did it every day and it felt good. And I've gone to a Soto Zen center as well, and yeah, I enjoy that type. I've been trying. I For some reason, I what keeps me meditating the most is when I'm switching it up. If I'm doing different types of meditation throughout the week, like that just kind of keeps me on it, because it makes it feel, I guess, more novel or something like that, which might
What do
not be the
you
best
do?
approach, but it keeps me going. You know, one day will be, well, one day I read a koan, and then I do, I mean, I guess I do zazen, but I'm also kind of reflecting on that koan, which from a Soto perspective, that's probably not a good thing. From a Rinzai Zen, I think that's pretty chill because they do that sort of thing. And then, you know, I'll do like, I have one night where I like to do some sort of heart-centered meditation, whether that's compassionate meditation, like Sharon Salzberg stuff, where I'm like, you know, trying to say, may you be happy, may you be healthy, to myself, to people I love, to people I feel neutral about, and people that I don't feel positively about. And one night I do visualization practice, one night I do mantra practice, that sort of thing, you know. So I'm just switching it up. One night I do mindfulness practice. And I have this, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Sri Yantra. Like, have you ever heard of the Sri Yantra?
Mm-mm.
It's this old, it's kind of like a mandala is the way that, you know, it's kind of like that, but it's supposed to be like the most,
Oh,
it's
I'm
basically
looking
supposed
at
to,
it.
yeah. So that's what it looks like. I have like a wooden Sri Yantra that I'll just stare at for like 15 minutes. And
No,
it's been pretty
that's
cool.
cool.
It's a good one. That's like one of my favorite like spiritual designs.
I want to, yeah, I actually might get one of these.
It's awesome.
I also want to get more. I'm honestly more interested in Rinzai because I'm probably similar to you in a way where like I'm like a maximalist about a lot of things. So Rinzai just seems like they have more. Soto's just very like zazen, like do the zazen, like that's what we do.
I know.
Whereas Rinzai, they're like smacking with sticks and like doing koans and like all that kind of thing. I'm more. I don't want to get hit, but
Yeah,
I want to get.
Yeah, the Soto Zen. You know, as much as I'm so grateful that I found the Angel City Zen Center, and the main guy who kind of hosts all the events and services there, like, has become one of my good friends, and he's definitely like hardcore Soto Zen, but he's got so much wisdom and he's taught me a lot. I've never been to a Rinzai center or anything like that, but yeah, Soto Zen. I'm just not drawn to hardcore Zazen as my only practice, and that's just me, you know.
Well, that's the only way to enlightenment. So
I know. So I guess I'm just never gonna get on the boat. Well, hey man, this has been really fun, dude. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about this and catch up in general. Is there anything else that you maybe thought that you might want to talk about before we end the call?
No, I think we touched on a lot of stuff that I just like to ramble about and hear other people ramble about. So I think
we hit a lot of good stuff, man. And honestly, I'm really excited for you on the program that you're in. And it seems like you're really like you're pushing yourself to constantly keep asking yourself these questions and try to, like, you're definitely not being quick to just be like, oh, this is what side I'm on, or this is my understanding of this or that.
That's kind of my big problem. I wish I could do that sometimes, but I like that about myself too.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll close it out. And thanks again, man.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is really cool. And I'm glad we got to talk. And
yeah, I know we need to talk more, dude. I miss chatting and I miss hanging out.